Millfield, Ohio was the kind of town where nothing much ever happened. With quiet streets, familiar faces, and modest homes lined up in neat rows, it was the type of place people moved to when they wanted peace. That's what Amanda Lewis thought when she relocated there with her daughter, Chloe. After a messy divorce left her financially drained and emotionally battered, she was desperate for a fresh start. Amanda had always tried to do what was best for her daughter. She worked long, hours at a local diner, saved what little she could, and did her best to create a stable life for them both. But under the surface, Amanda was lonely. She longed for connection, someone to talk to at night, someone who could fill the silence that echoed through their small two-bedroom apartment. That's when she met Trey Miller online. He was 19, tall, with shaggy hair and a smooth voice that came through clearly on late-night calls. He said he didn't care about her age, told her she was beautiful, smart, and strong. For someone who had been made to feel like nothing by her ex-husband, those words meant everything. Within a few weeks, Amanda was hooked. They began talking, daily. Trey told her he was between jobs, trying to figure things out. He said he didn't have much family, claimed he'd been misunderstood his whole life. Amanda felt protective of him. She saw in him someone broken, someone, like her, who just needed love. When she told Chloe about Trey, the girl was confused. She asked if he was going to stay with them. Amanda laughed it off, saying it was just a friend at first. But that changed quickly. Trey started visiting on weekends, then staying for days. Eventually, he moved in. To Chloe, the shift was uncomfortable. Their once quiet home became tense. Trey took over the living room, played loud music, stayed up all night watching violent shows. He was polite to Amanda but often ignored Chloe completely, unless he was snapping at her for something small. If she left her shoes by the door or forgot to rinse her plate, he'd raise his voice. Not enough to draw suspicion, but enough to make her nervous. Chloe didn't know how to explain it, but being around Trey made her stomach hurt. He looked at her in a strange way, like she was an intruder in her own home. Amanda, caught up in the illusion of a new romance, didn't seem to notice. She believed Trey was just adjusting, that he was young and needed time to grow into responsibility. She made excuses when Chloe seemed upset, brushing off concerns with a tight smile and a kiss on the forehead. At school, Chloe's teachers began noticing changes. She stopped volunteering to read aloud. Her drawings, once filled with flowers and happy scenes, turned darker. Shadows, locked doors, sad faces with no mouths. When asked about her home life, she said things were okay and quickly changed the subject. The guidance counselor made a note of it, but didn't follow up. Meanwhile, Amanda was falling deeper into her fantasy. She started believing Trey was her second chance. He told her he loved her, that they could build something real. He said he'd never leave, unlike her ex-husband. Amanda wanted so badly to believe him. She ignored the way Trey never seemed to hold a job, how he spent most of his days playing video games or sleeping. She told herself he just needed support. She didn't want to scare him away with pressure. Then the bruises started, small ones at first, on Chloe's arms, her shoulders. She claimed she fell off her bike or tripped at school. Amanda barely glanced at them, but neighbors noticed. One, elderly woman who lived next door, saw Chloe flinch when Trey opened the door to call her inside. Another heard shouting through the thin apartment walls late at night, but couldn't make out the words. Still, no one called the police. No one wanted to get involved. Trey's control over the household grew stronger. He began deciding what they ate, what shows they watched, when they went to sleep. Amanda, desperate to keep him happy, let him take the lead. Chloe felt like a guest in her own home. She tried to stay invisible, spending more time in her room, speaking only when spoken to. But it didn't matter. Trey always found something to complain about. He'd lecture her over crumbs on the table, accuse her of being disrespectful if she looked away while he was talking. One evening, Amanda came home to find Chloe crying quietly in her room. Her arm was swollen. She claimed she fell on the stairs. Amanda looked at her for a moment, then said she needed to be more careful. She didn't press further. In her mind, Chloe was just being dramatic. Trey would never really hurt her. He was rough around the edges, yes, but deep down he was kind. That's what she told herself, again and again. Chloe's behavior grew even more withdrawn. At recess, she sat alone. At home, she barely spoke. She didn't tell anyone what was happening. Not her friends, not her teachers, not her grandmother, who sometimes called to check in. She didn't think they'd believe her. After all, her own mother seemed to look the other way. Child Protective Services eventually received an anonymous call. The report mentioned concerns about Chloe's appearance and strange behavior. A caseworker visited their home. Amanda greeted them with a smile, invited them in, and spoke sweetly. Trey stayed in his room. Chloe, when questioned alone, gave vague answers. She said everything was fine, but her eyes stayed fixed on the floor. With no clear evidence of abuse, the case was marked low risk and eventually closed. Life returned to its new normal, a warped version of stability where silence meant survival and fear was as common as breakfast. Chloe no longer dreamed of sleepovers or birthday parties. She only wished for peace. And Amanda, though she may have had quiet doubts deep inside her, kept convincing herself that everything was under control. She didn't see the danger, or maybe she chose not to, because admitting the truth would mean facing a terrible reality, that the man she brought into their lives was not a savior, but something far worse. And that by ignoring the signs, by choosing to believe in love over evidence, she was placing her daughter in the hands of a ticking time bomb, one that was about to explode. The first time Chloe showed up at school with bruises, her teacher, Ms. Evans, noticed right away. They were small, scattered along her right forearm, yellow and green, already fading. When she asked about them, Chloe gave a nervous laugh and said she fell off her bike. It wasn't the first time a kid had given that excuse. Still, something about the way Chloe said it, eyes low, voice shaky, didn't sit right. Ms. Evans made a note in the file, told the school counselor, and kept an extra eye on her that week. But Chloe smiled during class and handed in her homework like normal. Whatever was happening, she was hiding it well. At home, the situation was growing more suffocating by the day. Trey had become more than just Amanda's boyfriend. He acted like a father, a warden, a dictator, depending on his mood. He had a short temper and a growing need for control. Everything had to be his way. If the TV volume was too loud, he'd yell. If Chloe left the fridge door open for a second too long, he'd throw a spoon across the room. The apartment had become a minefield, and Chloe was forced to tiptoe through it each day, never knowing what might set him off. The most disturbing part was that Amanda seemed oblivious, or maybe she saw it and chose to ignore it. She was working long shifts at the diner, and when she got home she was exhausted. Trey made her laugh sometimes. He cooked once in a while. He told her she was beautiful, even when she felt worn down. She clung to those moments like they were proof he wasn't all bad. She told herself that Chloe just didn't like having a man of the house again. that she'd warm up to Trey in time. But Chloe was not warming up to Trey. She was growing. Terrified of him, at night she could hear his footsteps coming down the hallway. Even if he was just going to the kitchen, her heart would start pounding. She began locking her bedroom door, though she knew it wouldn't stop him if he really wanted to come in. Trey didn't need an excuse to be cruel. He found reasons in the most innocent things: an unfinished chore, a spilled glass of water, a forgotten thank you. One night, Amanda was working the closing shift. Chloe was home alone with Trey. She stayed in her room as long as she could, curled under the blanket with her headphones on, trying to drown out the world. But Trey called her name. Once, twice. The third time, louder. She removed the headphones and came out. He was standing in the kitchen, holding a trash bag. He shoved it toward her and told her to take it out. She hesitated. It was dark outside, and she hated going to the dumpster behind the building. When she didn't move fast enough, he grabbed her wrist and squeezed hard, pushing the bag into her arms. She didn't cry, just nodded and walked out the door. When she returned, he was waiting. He didn't say a word. He just stared at her, breathing heavily. Then, without warning, he grabbed her by the arm again and shoved her into the wall. Not hard enough to break bones, but hard enough to bruise. He leaned in close, his voice a whisper now, and said that next time, she better not hesitate. Then came something even worse, the bite. Trey's teeth sank into her upper arm, through her t-shirt and into her skin. She screamed, more from the shock than the pain. He didn't let go right away. When he finally did, there were teeth marks, clear and deep. She backed away, holding her arm, trembling. Trey stared at her like nothing had happened. Like biting her was just another way to teach a lesson. When Amanda got home an hour later, Chloe was already in bed, covers pulled high. She didn't say anything about the bite. She never said anything anymore. Amanda peeked into her room, saw her sleeping, and shut the door quietly. At school the next day, Chloe wore a hoodie despite the warm weather. But the sleeves rolled up a little during gym class, and that's when another teacher saw the mark. A perfect semicircle of bruised skin. Too distinct, too specific to be accidental. They asked Chloe to come to the nurse's office. She gave a shy smile and said it was from wrestling with a friend. They pressed her gently, asked if everything was okay at home. She nodded again, and said she was fine. They didn't believe her, but they didn't have enough to push further. CPS was contacted again, and another visit was scheduled. This time. The caseworker came in the early evening. Amanda had just returned from work, tired but cheerful. She offered coffee, smiled a little too much, said everything was just fine. Chloe sat quietly on the couch, hands folded in her lap. The caseworker asked to speak with her alone. Amanda hesitated, then agreed. In the bedroom, the caseworker asked questions. Chloe answered them, each one with the same careful neutrality. Yes, she was doing well in school. Yes, she liked her teachers. Yes, she got along with Trey. When asked about the bruises, she claimed she was just clumsy. The woman looked at her closely, gently, trying to read between the lines. But Chloe didn't crack. She had learned how to lie by staying quiet. Without visible signs of ongoing abuse, and with no confession, the case was closed again. Trey had watched the entire visit from the hallway. Later that night, he said nothing. But the next morning, Chloe found her toothbrush broken in half in the bathroom sink. She knew it was a message. The biting got worse. It became a pattern. Sometimes he'd do it when he was angry. Sometimes it was random, as if he simply wanted to see if he could. Chloe's arms, shoulders, even the back of her neck became a map of pain. Each bite left behind a bruise, sometimes blood, always fear. She started wearing long sleeves all the time. She avoided mirrors. She barely spoke. At school she began drawing again, but her pictures were filled with cages and monsters. The counselor saw one sketch of a small girl behind bars, her mouth sewn shut. He called Chloe in again, but she offered the same answers as always. "I'm fine. Everything is fine." At home, Amanda was slipping deeper into denial. She noticed her daughter changing, yes, but every time she asked, Chloe brushed it off. Amanda told herself it was just puberty, that Chloe missed her father, that things would get better soon. She needed them to, because if she admitted that something was wrong, she would have to confront what kind of man she had let into their lives, and she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. But time was running out. It was the beginning of winter when things began to spiral faster than anyone could control. Snow blanketed the sidewalks, turning Millfield into a frozen postcard. Children bundled in puffy jackets made snowmen in the park, and lights flickered from windows in the neighborhood. But inside the Lewis apartment, warmth was a stranger. The small two-bedroom space was colder than the air outside, not because of the temperature, but because of the silence that had settled into every corner. The kind of silence that was heavy and dangerous. Chloe had stopped speaking much altogether. At school, she drifted from her friends. She ate lunch alone and spent recess sitting under the big oak tree in the yard, sketching things that didn't make sense to anyone but her. Pictures of locked rooms, sharp teeth, and giant hands grabbing at small figures. Her teachers noticed the change, but they were overwhelmed with other students. The counselor had already done what he could. Everyone had seen something, but no one had seen enough. At home, Trey was growing more possessive. He began locking the front door when Amanda went to work, keeping Chloe trapped inside. He told Amanda it was for safety, that the neighborhood was rough, and he didn't want anything happening to Chloe. Amanda nodded, grateful for his protectiveness. She believed he was trying, that he cared, that he was just young and rough around the edges. But the truth was that Trey wasn't protecting Chloe, he was isolating her. Chloe now spent her days in fear, pacing between the kitchen and her room. She didn't know what mood Trey would be in. Sometimes he was quiet and ignored her completely, pretending she didn't exist. Other times, he was hyperactive, watching her closely, his eyes darting over her like a predator sizing up prey. She hated the way he looked at her, the way his presence filled the room even when he said nothing. He made the air feel thick, like she couldn't breathe. One afternoon, Trey found Chloe sitting in the living room doing homework at the small coffee table. Amanda had just left for work. He sat down across from her and stared without speaking. Minutes passed. Chloe kept her eyes on her notebook, her hands shaking slightly. Then Trey picked up her pencil and broke it in half. No words, no expression. Just a silent warning. Later that day, when Chloe spilled a cup of water in the kitchen, Trey exploded. He slammed a cabinet door so hard it cracked, then grabbed Chloe by the arm and shoved her against the wall. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She had learned not to. But then came the bite, sharp, deep, and horrifying. This one was different. It wasn't just a snap of the teeth and retreat. This time he held on. His jaw locked. Her skin broke. Blood trickled down her arm. Still, she didn't make a sound. She just stood there, eyes wide, frozen in place. When Amanda returned later that evening, Chloe was already in bed, her arm bandaged with tissues and tape she found in the bathroom. She didn't tell her mother. Amanda peeked into the room, whispered goodnight, and closed the door. The next morning, Chloe was too sore to move her left arm. The bite mark had turned dark purple, with deep impressions. She tried covering it with a thick sweater, but it still throbbed under the fabric. At school, she couldn't write properly, and her teachers noticed. They asked again if she was okay, but she just nodded. No one saw the full extent of what was happening, and the people who had seen enough were growing used to being ignored. Back at home, Trey's behavior became more unpredictable. He stayed up later, smoked in the apartment despite Amanda's protests, and left messes everywhere. Chloe began cleaning up after him before he could yell. She figured if everything was neat, maybe he'd leave her alone. But nothing worked. His rage didn't follow logic. It came in waves, sudden and violent. Then came the day Amanda got a call from the school nurse. Chloe had collapsed in gym class. When Amanda arrived, the nurse gently explained that her daughter had a fever, fatigue, and an infection in her arm that needed attention. Chloe sat on the cot, pale and sweating, her bitten arm now red and swollen. Amanda looked horrified, but not for the reasons one might expect. Her first words were, "How did this happen?" Not in shock, but in panic. She feared that someone might ask too many questions, that people would start digging. At the hospital, the doctor asked what caused the wound. Chloe looked at Amanda. Amanda looked at the floor. The doctor pressed for an explanation, but Amanda simply said Chloe had been bitten by a dog in the neighborhood. It was an obvious lie. The marks were human. The bite radius didn't match an animal. The doctor hesitated, wrote down a note, and gave Chloe antibiotics. Then he filed a report. Another CPS investigation was opened. This time, Chloe was removed from school temporarily for home observation. Amanda was terrified. Trey, however, was enraged. The same night they got the visit from the new caseworker, Trey smashed a glass on the floor, stormed out of the apartment, and didn't return until morning. The pressure was building. Chloe's body had started to weaken. She was tired all the time, unable to eat without feeling sick. The infection was spreading faster than the antibiotics could work. Her small body wasn't healing like it should have. And still, Amanda wouldn't admit what had happened. She was stuck between guilt and fear, guilt for not protecting her daughter, and fear of losing Trey. She had wrapped her self-worth so tightly around her relationship with him that she couldn't bear to let it unravel. Trey sensed this power. He knew Amanda wouldn't leave him, no matter what, and that made him bolder. That same week, while Amanda was out buying groceries, Trey locked the front door, turned off the TV, and told Chloe to sit still on the couch. She obeyed. Minutes passed in silence. Then, without warning, he lunged. There was no trigger, no spilled drink, no broken rule. He just attacked, like something inside him had snapped completely. His hands wrapped around her wrists, dragging her to the ground. He bit her shoulder, her side, her leg, each time deeper, harder. As if he wasn't just trying to hurt her, he was trying to consume her. She screamed, louder than she ever had before, but no one heard. The neighbors had grown used to strange sounds from that apartment. No one knocked. When Amanda returned 20 minutes later, she walked into a nightmare. Blood stained the carpet. Chloe wasn't moving. Trey was pacing, muttering to himself, hands trembling. He looked at Amanda, eyes wild, and said, "She fell! She was acting crazy!" Amanda dropped the grocery bags. For the first time, she didn't believe him, but it was too late. Chloe wasn't breathing. The emergency call came in at 6:42 p.m. Amanda's voice was barely audible. She stammered through tears, her words choked and uneven. "She's not breathing. I think my daughter's dead." Paramedics arrived within minutes to the small third-floor apartment. The front door stood ajar, the living room dim and eerily quiet. What they walked into was not an accident scene. It was something far worse. Chloe's body was lying on the living room floor, half covered with a thin blanket. Her small frame was motionless, pale, with deep bruises covering her arms and legs. Her face was bloodless, lips tinged blue, and her body bore multiple circular wounds. The bites were unmistakable, human, aggressive, and recent. Blood had dried on several of them. The paramedics rushed to check for vital signs, but it was too late. Chloe was gone. Amanda stood near the wall, her back to it, shaking uncontrollably. Trey was in the kitchen, pacing like a trapped animal, shirtless and sweating. When asked what happened, he muttered something about a seizure, that Chloe had started screaming and collapsed, that he tried CPR. His voice was uneven, filled with false concern, but his eyes stayed too calm for the situation. The paramedics didn't press him. Protocol meant they focused first on the child, even though hope was already lost. Police arrived shortly after. They took in the room at a glance. The blood on the carpet, the marks on Chloe's body, the shattered picture frame in the corner. They asked Amanda to step outside. She obeyed without argument, her face blank now as if something inside her had shut down entirely. She didn't cry anymore. She just stared at her daughter's covered body as officers placed crime scene tape across the doorway. Detectives from the Child Homicide Unit were called in. What they saw was enough to trigger immediate suspicion. This was not a fall. This wasn't an accident. The evidence pointed clearly to a pattern of abuse, repeated, escalating, and finally fatal. The bite wounds were extensive. The bruises varied in age, some fresh, others older, healing in yellow and green. The child had been tortured over time. Trey was taken into custody at the scene for questioning. He didn't resist. He didn't speak much either. In the back of the squad car, he just sat staring out the window, his fingers tapping an erratic rhythm on his leg. When asked what happened during the ride, he repeated the word accident several times, as if saying it. Enough might make it true. At the station, detectives began building their timeline. They interviewed neighbors, teachers, social workers. A disturbing picture emerged quickly. Neighbors reported hearing yelling, banging, and crying from the apartment for months. One even admitted he once heard what sounded like a child pleading through the wall, but shrugged it off as a tantrum. School records revealed that Chloe had shown signs of abuse, bruises, withdrawn behavior, disturbing drawings. 2 Child Protective Services reports had already been filed in the past 6 months, but each time the investigation had closed without finding sufficient evidence to remove her. Autopsy results confirmed what investigators feared. Chloe had died from a combination of internal bleeding, trauma-induced shock, and an untreated infection from a bite wound. Her body was covered in human bite marks, over a dozen in varying stages of healing. Her ribs had bruising consistent with being grabbed violently. There were also signs of dehydration and malnutrition. She had been dying slowly, well before the final assault. Amanda was brought in for questioning the next morning. She looked hollow, like someone who hadn't slept, eaten, or breathed properly in days. The detectives asked gently at first, but their questions soon turned direct. Why didn't she report the abuse? Did she know what Trey was doing? How could she let it happen? At first, Amanda denied it. She claimed she never saw the bruises, that Chloe never said anything, that Trey wasn't violent. But as the hours passed, her story began to fracture. She admitted Trey could be rough, that Chloe had mentioned once being scared, that maybe she should have paid more attention. But she insisted she never thought he would hurt her like this. It was a defense heard too many times before, one that didn't hold up against the evidence. Text messages between Amanda and a friend showed she had expressed concern about Trey's temper. One message read, "He scared Chloe today, said she was being rude. I told him to calm down." Another simply said, "She's been so quiet lately. I think she hates him." Amanda had noticed the signs, but she didn't act. Investigators combed through their apartment and found more damning evidence. In Chloe's room, there was a notebook with drawings of teeth, bleeding wounds, and a large shadowy figure with sharp claws. One drawing showed a stick figure girl trapped in a cage, surrounded by what looked like bite marks. The pictures told a story no one had wanted to see before. A silent scream scribbled in crayon. Trey's criminal record, previously sealed due to his juvenile status, revealed a history of aggression. He had been involved in multiple fights during his teenage years, suspended from school several times for violent behavior, and once arrested for attacking a classmate. Though none of it had resulted in prison time, the warning signs were there, just buried deep enough to escape casual notice. When pressed during interrogation, Trey finally broke. His confession was chilling in its simplicity. He said Chloe was disrespectful, that she didn't listen, that she would look at him like he was nothing. He claimed the biting started as a punishment, a warning. But he admitted it became something else, a habit, an urge. He described the final incident with a cold detachment, blaming Chloe for making him angry, for screaming too loud, for moving too slow. His words were hollow, devoid of remorse. The community reaction was swift and horrified. News of the case spread quickly. 11-year-old girl mauled to death by mother's boyfriend, headlines screamed. Vigils were held outside the school. Candles, photos, and handwritten notes piled up near the playground fence. Parents wept. Teachers blamed themselves. The counselor who had filed the original CPS report stopped coming to work for a week. Everyone wondered the same thing. How had this happened in plain sight? Amanda was charged with child endangerment and neglect resulting in death. Trey faced charges of first-degree murder, aggravated assault, and torture of a minor. The courtroom would see them both, each accused not just of a crime, but of allowing a child's nightmare to grow unchecked until it became fatal. What began as quiet bruises, ignored whispers, and overlooked drawings had ended in something unimaginable. Chloe's voice had been silenced long before she died, and now the system that failed her would have to reckon with her death. But in the apartment, behind that locked door, Chloe had screamed. Someone should have heard. Someone should have listened. The trial began 6 months after Chloe's death. It was held in the county courthouse, a tall gray building that now carried the weight of a child's lost life. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, community members, school staff, and families sat in tense silence. Chloe's name had become a symbol. Her story had stirred something deep and uncomfortable, a reminder of what could happen when warning. Signs are dismissed, when systems fail, and when the people closest to a child choose silence over protection. Trey was brought in first. Dressed in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, He showed no emotion. He didn't look at anyone. His eyes remained fixed on the floor. From the start, prosecutors painted a chilling picture. They described in detail the pattern of abuse, how it had started small and escalated into something monstrous. They showed photos of Chloe's injuries. They read out the autopsy findings. Every word was heavy. Every detail added to the horror. Witnesses were called. Chloe's teachers spoke of her withdrawal, the bruises, the drawings, and the unanswered questions. A school counselor shared how she had submitted not one but 2 reports to child services. The emergency room nurse described Amanda's discomfort the day Chloe was brought in with the infected bite, how she seemed more concerned about being questioned than about her daughter's health. The doctor confirmed the bite was unmistakably human, and the lead detective walked the jury through the timeline of events, from Trey's arrival in the home to Chloe's final moments on the living room floor. The defense tried to argue that Trey had mental instability, that he had grown up in violence and lacked impulse control. They claimed the fatal incident wasn't intentional, that it was a tragic accident born out of stress and poor judgment. But the evidence was too overwhelming. The confession, the injuries, the history of aggression, the witness statements. There was no version of the story in which Trey was innocent. There was no accident here. Amanda's trial ran separately, but it was no less intense. Her charges were different. She wasn't accused of committing the violence, but of allowing it to happen. Of choosing Trey over her daughter. Of watching Chloe fade and doing nothing. Prosecutors highlighted the text messages, the misread flags, the lies told to authorities. They showed how Amanda allowed Trey to isolate Chloe, how she failed to remove her daughter from danger even after seeing fear in her eyes. She had opportunities, many of them, but never acted. Amanda's defense was centered on denial and desperation. Her lawyers claimed she was manipulated by Trey, afraid of losing the only stability she had. They said she didn't fully understand the extent of the abuse, that she believed Chloe was exaggerating, that she was overwhelmed, not malicious. But the jury saw through it. Amanda had chosen to ignore what was right in front of her, and it cost her daughter everything. The verdicts came down hard and swift. Trey was found guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and torture. The judge sentenced him to life without the possibility of parole. Amanda was found guilty of felony child neglect, resulting in death, and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Neither of them shed a tear as the sentences were read. Amanda stared ahead, vacant. Trey smirked slightly, like none of it mattered. Outside the courthouse, the public reaction was divided. Some believed Amanda deserved every year of her sentence. Others saw her as a victim, too, a woman consumed by fear and manipulated into blindness. But one fact remained unquestioned: Chloe was dead, and no excuse could change that. In the months following the trial, Chloe's story began to shape new conversations. School districts implemented stricter guidelines for reporting suspected abuse. Child Protective Services came under scrutiny, with audits revealing major gaps in follow-up procedures and communication failures. Chloe's school installed a mural in her memory: bright colors, butterflies, and a small plaque that read, "She was seen, she was loved, she is missed." Community activists held rallies, demanding better systems to protect children. Chloe's case was mentioned in news specials and documentaries. Her face, once tucked behind a timid smile in class photos, became a haunting reminder of innocence lost. Meanwhile, Trey began his life behind bars. Isolated in a maximum security wing, he became just another case file in the prison system. No visitors came, no letters arrived. His name, once notorious in the media, quickly faded as new stories emerged. He remained locked away, far from the world he shattered. Amanda struggled inside the prison walls. She was not treated kindly by other inmates. Word had spread about why she was there. Child neglect cases were never well received. She spent most of her time in isolation, requesting mental health support. In quiet moments, she scribbled letters to Chloe that no one would ever read. Letters full of apologies and regret. But they came too late. For Chloe's former teachers, healing came slowly. They questioned their choices, their judgments, their hesitations. Many carried guilt, wondering if one more phone call, one more insistence could have saved her. The counselor who first reported the abuse eventually returned to work. She kept Chloe's drawing pinned behind her desk as a reminder: never assume, never dismiss, always dig deeper. Chloe's death changed people. It cracked something open in the community. It showed how silence enables harm, how love without action is just an empty promise, how children don't always have the power to cry loud enough to be saved. As the anniversary of Chloe's death approached, a candlelight vigil was held in the town square. Dozens gathered, holding candles against the night wind. A former classmate read a poem she had written for Chloe. Another student placed a handmade wreath beneath her photo. No one spoke loudly. No one needed to. Grief had its own language. In the end, Chloe's story did not disappear. It echoed in schools, in courtrooms, in whispered conversations between social workers and teachers, in training seminars and emergency protocols. She became more than a victim. She became a voice, even in death. A warning. A symbol. A little girl who should have been saved, who now urges others to act before it's too late. Her silence had been ignored, but her memory would never be.